today's webinar, and at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Jim.
Good morning. Thanks, Michelle. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining the HBK Manufacturing Solutions Group webinar for the month of August. And today we have what I think is a very interesting and important topic, improving business operations and efficiencies in a manufacturing environment. Today's presenter is going to be Tyler Gargano. Tyler joined the firm a little over a year ago and has been focused on, he spent his career, he's now our Director of Advisory Services, and he spent his career working on internal audit controls with manufacturing and distribution companies. So I think he lends a lot of experience and specialized knowledge in these areas that are very important and all too often, I think, overlooked. Sometimes we see that companies are so focused on putting out fires or getting things done today that they're not looking at some of these areas that are very important to help them manage and control their businesses. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tyler and let him talk. Certainly we welcome any questions that anyone has. Please post them and we can address them as they come up or at the end. But looking forward to hearing more from Tyler. So all yours, Tyler.
Awesome. Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Michelle. I appreciate it. And thanks everybody for jumping in on the webinar and joining today. When I was asked to talk, I think I always try to think of a topic that is not going to sound bland. I think of something that is actually going to, help us and help our clients and our non-clients in the manufacturing environment. And I think what a better way to shift the mindset, especially in the summer months that we're in, and as we're getting into winter and fall, how can we get better? And that's essentially what it boiled down to when I was trying to come up with a topic of, what's going to add value here. And I think it's our operations. It's where can we find something that we're doing and elaborate off of that and work through that. And I think the biggest kind of takeaway from today that I would like to kind of push to the group is, find something and ask yourself this question is find something inside your company or what your operations, your day-to-day are that's not working and take a look at it. Take a step back and understand, wow, we have a really long lag time, or wow, we're really not getting, the organization and people in the right places at the right time. I think that's kind of what I want to focus on, different strategies to view that, to view problems that we've seen, that I've seen, that I'm currently facing with clients. I think today's discussion, kind of learning objectives, focus a lot on kind of the foundational of internal auditing. And I don't want to scare people away when they hear internal auditing, because it's a lot more than what it sounds like. As a firm, and especially within kind of this manufacturing world, you hear the word audit and probably get a little scared, as I would as well. But we really aren't auditors. And that's kind of how I like to view myself. I'm not an auditor. I like to help businesses. I like to focus on, areas within manufacturing environments or companies that is going to streamline their businesses and build the bottom line, help business leaders and business owners understand where the success lies within the organization. And that's really what I want to focus on today. We're going to talk about kind of the audit process, but it's all going to kind of turn back into what the end goal is here in finding those efficiencies, within the company. We're going to run through a lot of what I do, start to finish with our clients of when, they're looking at expanding their kind of internal services and internal mindset of we can focus on different objections in different areas of the business. But as an agenda, we're going to look at, what is the impact on the organization? Kind of what does my company have to do? What does my leaders have to do? Finance team, COO, CFO people, what do we have to do if we are going to go down a journey of starting an internal audit organization or, looking to do some internal testing? Ultimately, we're going to roll that into what's the result? Obviously we want a deliverable at the end, and what's it going to tell me? And then I actually formatted in 3 case studies here where they're real life examples of manufacturing clients that faced issues in warehousing, faced issues within their facility, and then facing profitability issues as well. And then kind of ultimately, what is a forward outlook scope? So some kind of hotbed areas in the industry that I'm seeing specific to manufacturers of, hey, we should be looking into these areas as maybe doing some testing or maybe just kind of having a conversation, holistically with the team and with the group on what we can be doing to expand our reach and understanding of our company. To get started, we're just going to kind of talk high level through the internal audit process. If you've joined webinars previously where I've been a speaker, you've probably seen this slide. But ultimately, just a quick high level understanding of what is the role of an internal audit group. And I'm going to say internal audit group, and it really can be phased as what is HBK Advisory's role? What is where does Jim, Amy, and myself kind of come into play with all of this, and how can we set the roadmap where you are doing testing, where we are able to understand what the outputs are from our businesses. But essentially, by definition, internal auditing, it's an independent assurance on risk management, governance, or internal controls. That's just kind of a fluff for saying value in my mind. It's a value added service. We typically, internal audit organizations, they work 100% on behalf of management. We work for management. So at the guidance of management is how we're scoping. It's how we're doing our risk assessments. We'll get into that later, but ultimately that is what we're trying to do is add value and kind of give it an extra set of eyes and ears into the organization from not only a compliance standpoint, which a lot of people will kind of associate audit to as a compliance function, but also as a consulting in kind of a value-added strict service. It helps bridge that gap of where can we fit and where can we work in a better, faster, and more efficient manner. We're going to get into this a little bit more on the next slide with the public company, private company, large company, small company. But essentially what it boils down to, especially in a manufacturing environment, is when I was thinking about this, what are the 3 big things that we face as manufacturers? And ultimately, what I kind of came up with in my world was, inventory and fixed assets. I think, at the end of the day, what's our most important asset is what we have. And that's going to be, our inventory, how we're housing it, how we're moving it, how we're categorizing, classifying, and understanding our inventory movements and what we're doing to calculate that. People in production, what's our staffing look like? What does, our people across the world, how's company morale? And, are we meeting production quotas? Are we getting enough product, goods, materials out the door or in the door as best and efficient as we can? And then ultimately, kind of the third point is it might be a little bit different, but it's warehouse strategy. And I've been facing and seeing and hearing a lot of this I don't think we're laid out correctly. As kind of architectural as that sounds, is are rows in the correct place? Does it make sense for the flow of goods? If we have a fast moving item, does it make sense to have it in the back of the warehouse? So I've been having a lot of questions like that, holistically. But the main focus of those 3 areas of what the value add of that internal audit department or outside consultants bringing them in is a focus on those efficiency. And it's what are we doing and can we do it better? A lot of the conversations I like to have with our current clients and even our non-clients as an HBK firm, we work within a lot of different markets, whether they be public companies or private companies, large, small, mom and pops that maybe, blew up to this large conglomerate. But it's really what can you do for me? And we kind of shaped a deliverable where it's conducting an operational risk assessment, which we're going to dive into the risk assessment process, and 5 audits a year. Yeah, and that's kind of been the understanding of within 5 audits a year, you can get a really, really good scope and a really good understanding of higher risk areas in your company that you're going to get a good bit of value back to the organization as a whole. Like I said earlier, I want to talk about public, private, large, small. Public companies, if you've heard this before, sorry, but public companies they're required to have SOX control. So ultimately, Sarbanes-Oxley Act, they're required to have some type of control-based environment that is reflected upon the financials, and it's noted in the 10 Ks and Qs that there's a sound internal control environment. So a lot of the times the internal audit organization will get bucketed into this kind of SOX control or internal control framework, which is good, but there's more to it, because a lot of times the companies will utilize internal audits to also do their formalized internal auditing, where they're doing actual testing. They're testing the controls in the environment where they're actually taking place. And private companies coercively kind of can do the same thing. They can have the conversation of, what do our controls look like? Now, they're not going to be under strict regulation like a public company is, but having the conversation of, what are our controls doing? Do we have too many controls? Do we have not enough controls? And how are they operating? I challenge a lot of my clients, if they're not public, to do some type of test. Some type of test of your internal controls, some type of test of operational efficiencies and kind of whatever is going to work to not inhibit the business, but to also understand, hey, we might be doing too many checks and balances, or hey, we need more checks and balances here or there. And then kind of, what does that final deliverable look like? And I have some examples here in some later slides, but, really what they do is it's a report ultimately. And sometimes it's a report on graphs, a report on kind of how we're representing data is going to change. And, it essentially helps show that evaluation of a company's internal controls, but also gives you that independent conclusion on the organization's operations. And that's kind of where I like to sit, is giving that kind of conclusion on what's working and where's everything kind of at. We, a lot of times, will work with our clients to understand, they'll come to us with, hey, I just don't think we're operating correctly. And as funny as it sounds, we kind of go in there with a blank slate and we try to understand that. So that's kind of what I'm going to walk through here in the next, 4 or 5 slides of, a client has come to us with a concern of, hey, we're just not operating. So the question is, where does HBK start? Where do we start, especially in a manufacturing environment where the language and the communication is so fluid to us? So that's kind of what we're going to roll into. But before we get into that, there is a poll question, should be up here for CPE. I'll let that go on for a minute.
So this is a question to be answered for those that want CPE from the event, and as opposed to the ones that we typically do, these are actually questions that require a little bit of thought. So I'll give you a hint. It's not C.
Good job, Jim. Awesome. Well, for those of you that want CPE, I hope you all picked D as both A and B, because I kind of just noted that, what is our role and duty of an internal audit team? Yes, we're evaluating internal controls. I think it's a great value-added service that the internal audit department or outside consultants can bring, but also providing that independent conclusion on the operations. It's kind of a twofold approach of what we're doing, especially in manufacturing. Controls need to be tidied up. They need to be understood across multiple levels of management and warehouse floor production facilities, but also understanding the operations. I think giving a clear-eyed view into the operations to the board, to the CFO, to the CEO, to the audit committee, if you have one, it paints the picture of what's going on by giving an independent view into those ins and outs. Great. We're going to talk about the value of the IA team. We're going to look at risk assessments and kind of scoping discussion. So like I said earlier, this is going to kind of be like a real world example of a client's approached us of, we're not operating. We don't know what's wrong. There's something going on. Kind of where do you start? And I like to start, kind of what I said earlier. We're going to do a risk assessment and 5 audits. And starting with a risk assessment, what is the approach of a risk assessment? And we like to understand kind of entity-wide, audit process-wide and assessment, and then process analysis, communication, validation of reporting, and follow-up. And these kind of get grouped into what the approach of the audit group is. We do that entity risk assessment, so we understand kind of what's going on at a very, very high level. Kind of drill down a little bit further into doing those risk assessments where we're doing more knowledge share base of, where's the risk sit? The main goals of risk assessments are identifying those risks, assess the risk, and prioritize the risk. Each company in any kind of situation is going to face risk. It's just the nature of what we do, especially in a manufacturing environment. So how we look at the risk is going to ultimately trickle down to the importance of the risk. This helps internal audit, it helps management understand how these risks should be managed and how we can combat the risk. There's different strategies that we as an advisory group, we kind of roll out to mitigate risk. We look at kind of what the impact, the likelihood, and then what controls are kind of in place there. And when we're looking at what's the impact of the process going to be, what's the likelihood something's going to happen, big small changes. I like to look at did we buy another facility, did we ramp up production, did we, downsize? Did something happen in our staffing, fundings, promotions, firings, anything kind of along those lines? And I think specifically looking at kind of an unanticipated event impact. I don't think, and I hate to go back to the COVID times, but I don't think anybody was really ready for that. And especially in our manufacturing world where there were shutdowns, there was, labor shortages, there was distribution issues, there was stuff stuck in the borders, there was kind of the flow of goods was challenged, and were we ready for that? So having kind of a continuity plan to understand that stuff can happen, and how agile are we when we come back to our day-to-day business. And then ultimately it's looking at controls, which is sound policies and procedures. And you kind of have to ask yourself the question of, does this make sense, and is it helping the company, and is it adding value holistically? And then finally, I like to look at like kind of a training when we're looking at a risk assessment. It's these risk assessments are conversations, and we'll get into it on the next slide of what a risk assessment would look like. But they're trainings, they're discussions, they're how do you view the organization, how do you view your processes that you lead and own. From there, we drill down a little bit further to do kind of a process analysis where we're doing an assessment or efficiency benchmarking, which is kind of what you're going to see in the next slide of where do you sit in the risk world based on different procedures that we have within the organization. From there, we drill down a little bit more to look at the communication, the validation, reporting. That's what I would like to say. This is more testing. This is where the actual audit work will get scoped in, take place, and communicated to the businesses, and then ultimately monitoring follow-up. We'll get into remediation testing and kind of what the value is there of, hey, we had a whole bunch of findings in a review that we did. What does it look like when we go back to test, and what the benefit is there? But ultimately, that's what it would round out. And it's noted under their scorecarding, which I like, using a scorecard map of understanding, is it a high risk, a low risk, medium risk? Where's everything kind of sitting? So this, what's on your screen right now, is it's a risk assessment, ultimately, and it shows us the three different inherent risk, controls, and residual risk. Inherent risk is info that is obviously inherent. It's not a control failure. It's inherent risk doesn't really consider specific controls being included or not. Inherent is considered as like a current risk level given what we have, is how I like to look at it. And then residual risk is going to focus more on what are we doing to combat inherent risk, and what are we doing to combat the higher risk areas. So just kind of quick definition clarity. But each company is going to have inherent risk. Each company should combat those with residual risk, long story short. And kind of the risk assessment that you see on your screen paints a picture of, in I think the very first line, where we're looking at reporting, reputational reporting. There's a loss of donor support here. So inherent risk was red. We don't have sound controls over here, which is obviously poor. And then we have a bad residual risk, which is causing an uptick in a risk direction. I think so when we perform risk assessments, we get to these conclusions and these colors through 100% collaboration. And that's kind of the good part of working with an internal audit group is having these candid discussions of, there's changes going on in my company. We're having problems. We don't have enough trucks to deliver goods. We don't have, we might need another machine to get more production out of the group. We're facing these issues. That's where these conversations would take place, which are ultimately going to impact the various different kinds of risks in different ways, which is going to ultimately lead to a risk direction. what you're seeing on the screen with a risk direction pointing upwards, obviously meaning a higher risk, a lot of times we'll scope in those areas in some capacity. If we're able to scope them in kind of multiple audits, multiple reviews, it's great to help lower that risk, because then we can kind of combat the risk assessment with actual physical testing. Where you're going to see the flatlined or kind of a no change in risk direction, where it'd be kind of a 50%, let's just say, in risk, we like to view those as well. All risk is there, whether it's good risk or bad risk is up for discussion. And decision amongst leadership and the internal audit department. But risk assessments add great value. I think they're great discussion points of where we're going to be drawing conclusions from. All of these kind of pieces flow together, and essentially, back to the kind of world I'm pretending to live in, of the company came to us with an issue. This is where I would start. I would start trying to understand, where is the issue? What's this look like? And as you can see, there's a lot of upward arrows, and that is going to be that increased risk that we're going to see, and we're going to really, really dive into testing. So after we kind of develop the risk assessment and understand where the risk is sitting, we scope. And ultimately, kind of what the scoping looks like, it's just like the risk assessment. It's collaboration. It's working together. I said it earlier, but we work on behalf of management as kind of an arm and a leg to the audit committee or to the board or to the CEO in some cases. But we really are just providing this roadmap so that leaders have concerns or issues that they might have seen at different companies or current companies, and how are we combating them. But we try to follow those concerns. And the risk assessment might tell us one thing, and the conversation with the board might tell us another thing, where we might need to scope in some extra procedures. We might need to look at something differently because of the conversation that we had with the board and working together. Ultimately, though, and what you see on the screen is 4 goals of our test in some capacity. We evaluate the accounting administrative control, and these are kind of what the scopes are going to look at. Now, scoping changes based on companies, but trying to stay general, we look at kind of your finance department is really what that top bubble is saying. Evaluation of your accounting administrative control. Do we have sound controls around our finance department? Do we have appropriate sign-offs? Do we have appropriate communications back and forth, so on and so forth within the finance department? Protection of assets, like I said earlier, inventory, fixed assets. That's our business. That's where we make our money, and that's where we're either successful or not successful. Are those assets protected physically, as well as our IT environment? I've seen most recently a few months ago, there was a manufacturing client that was hacked here as an HBK client, and we worked hand in hand with them to get out of that environment that they were in, where they were hacked, and get back to business. It was a complete disruption of business, a complete pause on operations, and they had to slow and shut down for a period of time while they handled with the hack. So is our IT environment sound and protected as well? Compliance with established policies and procedures kind of goes back to what I said earlier when we're looking at the risk assessment of, do we have sound controls? Do we have a firm understanding of what everything's doing? And then reliability and validity of reports. The reports that we're generating, are they good? Do they make sense? I've seen time and time again, allowance for doubtful accounts, a depreciation schedule. Depreciation schedule is one I actually just came across my desk the other day. There was about 700 lines in a facility that's not that big. There's just, so are we cleaning up our reports? Do our reports provide good data and a clear understanding of what we're trying to depict and do? So to paint the picture of what we've done so far is we've had the conversations, we've done our risk assessments, we've scoped our audit. So we understand the kind of 5 audit areas based on our operational risk assessment that we completed, the 5 audits that we are going to work on as a team. And these have been communicated to the board, agreed upon, signed on the dotted line per se. I kind of threw this next slide in because I think scheduling is extremely important, not only to the auditors, but to the business, to understand, we can work around the uptick of a busier season. If we're producing, something that's produced in the summer months, we're not going to come in and poke around an audit during your busier times. So it's really, agreed upon schedule, communication, and what works. And having the ability and flexibility to kind of do agile auditing and have the conversations of something might happen throughout the year where, we might have to shift scope, we might have to shift attention, we might have to add another audit in throughout the year to cover our bases. But having a clear set calendar, a clear set understanding is really what's going to help. We have another CPE question. We touched on this kind of back a couple slides ago in the risk assessment. I'll let everybody answer it. And if you recall, there was only a red, a yellow, and a green dot. So process of elimination here. I'll knock one out for you. Hope you all answered A. In this case, when we're looking at a company recently acquired a business, there's risk there. There's a ton of risk there. A lot of times you might not know what we're getting into. We might not, fully understand what we're looking at and from an internal control and an internal audit basis. But ultimately, there's going to be a high risk associated with it, any acquisition that's taking place. Especially manufacturers, when we're looking at production, when we're looking at back office, what does this environment look like, and what we're signing up for purchasing, does it make sense? Next two slides go together, and really I wanted to focus on internal controls for a minute and what the benefits of sound controls are, and really just to kind of summarize what sound controls do is they help roadmap. They help you understand what is the day-to-day look like of your business. Are there checks and balances? Where are the multiple times a day controls taking place? Or it's all frequency based. Do we have sound controls and communications across our whole company? When I look at controls, I like to look at key versus non-key, frequency, and then I kind of will throw them in a COSO element when we're looking at kind of what the control environment's looking at. Is the risk assessment taking into consideration of controls, the activities of the controls, and then the information communication amongst the teams of, how well are they understanding the controls is kind of what you're going to see in those COSO elements from a holistic side. And when we're looking at controls, you can see on the slide here, we have manual, IT, automated controls. We look at all the controls. There is no kind of line there of operations and IT. We kind of combine them both, back across. Reporting. So this is kind of looking at what the deliverable is going to look like. Report structure is report structure, and that's agreed upon with the clients and what your style is. Typically in our reports, what I like to do is obviously, as you can see here, we highlight the scope of what we tested and identified, which just goes back to what I mentioned earlier, where we looked at the risk assessment and we found, an elevated risk in our inventory processes. So we're going to reiterate the scope of our testing of what we did and kind of why. We looked at the inventory count procedures. We looked at classification of fixed assets and kind of the movement of inventory amongst the facility. That's where that's going to get called out. Right next to that, you're going to see the observation summaries or what did we find, whether they be financial, operational, or compliance observations, and it kind of get totaled up across the whole thing, where we get a total view. In this case, it was 4 findings. That bled in together. So it essentially will paint the picture of what we're looking at when we're getting into the report. Give a little bit of background and audit summary of what the facility, the location, the company is doing, where they, when they got started, what the goal of the company is. And then we kind of roll right into kind of the observations of what we saw during our testing, what we saw during our reviews. A lot of value in these audit reports, across not only our, direct people that we're working with, but also if we're starting an internal audit department or starting kind of an internal compliance department, this is kind of where my value ticket would be. We're getting an extra eyes and ears on testing. So coarsely, what this is going to look like is we find these 4, 6, 8, 10 observations. What anything looks like. There can be an infinite amount of observations in an audit. So there really is no limit in terms of what can be tested. And we look at remediation testing. So we'll produce our observations, produce our audit report, then we'll conduct a follow-up report, probably a year later or 6 months later. It's all in line of when we come to conclusions with our findings of when we think they will be resolved. So every finding is tagged with a rating and then a timeline for resolution and then a internal audit agreed upon action plan. And those action plans is really what we're going to be testing when we're doing our remediation testing. The action plans say, this is how we can fix this finding. Do we need new controls? Do we need to look at process differently? Do we need to implement something different? We'll come back and test those. Again, there's no number we can test. Each audit would kind of take place. So say we do, 5 audits. We do a risk assessment, 5 audits year 1. Year 2, we do a risk assessment and look back across. Another poll question here. Let you guys look at that. Just covered this. What's the limit of internal audit findings that can get flagged for remediation testing? It's the answer C. There is no limit. Like I said, we can test and test and test and find and find and find, and there is no limit in terms of what can be retested and what we can look at. So the next kind of phase of this webinar, I want to get into case studies, and this is where I want to spend a good bit of time of. These are real life examples of what's taken place and what I've seen and what we've seen in manufacturing environments. So case study 1, what we're looking at is company background. This is a public company. They're top 50 in the world, 100 plus locations all around the world, internationally and domestically, manufacturing heavy metal. Internal audit has conducted a formalized risk assessment and scope has been confirmed by management. Within the agreement of the engagement, HBK internal audit is to conduct 15 service center audits and 10 formalized audits by locations and get a full year of SOX testings, BP, finance, and IT. Is what that looks like, and especially like kind of focused on the by location. When we're doing audits, sometimes facilities, companies will have service centers where they're not as big as production facilities, or they're kind of middle distribution points per se of. If I'm a facility, out of Youngstown, Ohio, you might have a service center over in, South Dakota that's going to service kind of the West Coast and the centering of the United States. It's really a distribution channel that helps, movement of goods. So this was an issue that was raised to us. The company's grown significantly through acquisitions. They are constantly buying smaller companies or companies that are in the same ballpark as them. So operations have expanded to multi-countries as well as multi-locations within North America. The COO has reached out for a better understanding on how to get new locations up to speed on how operations should be ran overseas. So we'll start with that and then we'll get into the next one. But so COO reached out looking to get an understanding of how to get these locations working better and kind of what to do. So what we did is we performed a risk assessment and we understood where's the riskier areas based on geographical location, whether they be import, output of goods, what does the border relationship look like, and what does, their production facility look like. From there, we were able to scope and understand where's the key kind of components that's going to really not be a dotted line anymore, but really draw a solid line from corporate management to new facility overseas. And from that, it's a control web. It's a control bridge per se of, we have sound internal controls and we have sound processes and procedures in North America. We have to do a full implementation project of the same policies, processes, and procedures internationally. I personally was in Brazil when we were doing this, and it was a great project. We really, really had a lot of value for the Brazil location to open up and start running and operating. Conversely, we did the same, very similar conversation with the COO at multiple locations in North America, where we're looking at multi-states and even some in the same state as the corporate headquarters. And it was a very similar approach of understanding what's actually taking place there, especially when you're looking at an acquisition of some sort or a growth project where we're going to a multi-facility. This is kind of, are they up to speed? Where's the current state versus future state, right? I like to fall back on a lot, but looking at what does this look like, and how can we get them to be operating at the same pace, size, communication style as our corporate facility. The next issue that was raised is storage of inventory as well as distribution of inventory has overwhelmed a majority of facilities and service centers in the East Coast. How can IA understand and solve these issues on hand? So this is, I think this is kind of a bigger area that I've seen in kind of working over the last few months is a lot of ramp up of production is causing an overflow of inventory, especially kind of in what the nature of where I live, which, right there in Western PA, we're doing a lot of steel manufacturing and heavy metal manufacturing. So what do we do with this uptake of inventory? And it's a case by case basis, but in the case that's on the screen right now, what we did is we offer incentives, obviously to buyers. You work to move the goods across, but when we're looking at what we're doing in processing steel per se, how does that move? And what we had to do is expand storage facilities, expand layout of warehousing to fit the product, and as well as start pushing the product out to our consumers and to our buyers to understand where's the, do I need an extra piece? What is my inventory levels look like from a client perspective? And that's where we're able to kind of look at an expansion of the facility is a daunting task, but 9 out of 10 times there's places and ways to make excess inventory work within a facility that you're already at capacity of. Case study 2, moving on, is same company, so nothing's changed. And the main issue here is, through these acquisitions, operations have expanded into these locations based on the facilities that's going on. It was the ask here. So we have the background, we have the knowledge. We've been working with this client for multiple years. What's in order production timelines are not being met. So we're having a lag. We can't get products out the door is really the boiled down issue. So what we did here in this case was interesting. We looked at scheduling and production schedules. We looked at kind of what the output of the machinery was. Where it landed was we didn't have enough machines. We actually had to reinvest back and get a new production line. And what did that look like is kind of a daunting task to discuss and to think about. But if we're not able to produce at the order levels, we're obviously going to be facing other issues. So having the conversation of expanding our lines, expanding kind of the production, the schedule, we're able to hire new people, get a more formalized and self schedule, but then to focus on how much product can we get out the door and is it feasible? In the case that's on the screen right now, a lot of what happened was there was way too many orders coming in. So we expanded the facility actually into 2 new production lines where it was more around the clock, 24-hour days and night turns that we were producing goods at all times of the day, rather than just kind of on an on-order basis that was necessary. So we through that strategy of ramping that up, we were able to meet the timelines, improve the flow of the product, improve those goods, and so on and so forth. So 2A, and this is kind of going to be the exact same situation, but this is a private company. So let's just say, the company was handed to the CEO from his father. The son's grown the company to be a larger player. So we're talking private company, a little bit bigger now. What do we do? So say the funds aren't as readily available to open a new production line, to open a new, expand our facility and expand kind of what we're doing. And there, it's a very similar approach. It's looking at scheduling and looking at where can we get more efficiency and more production out, and is that starting day and night turns? Is that looking at what does our order intake and our lead time look like? We don't want to kind of get behind an 8 ball where we're looking at we're not meeting our orders or we're not meeting demand at any capacity. especially kind of when we're looking at, smaller private companies or even mid-sized and even larger private companies. They're local and they're, tied within the community. A lot of the employees are local. So, understanding that high production, good quality products are coming out of the warehouse and out of the facility is important. And then case study 3. So case study 3 is public company, multi locations. They manufacture ATM machines and vault doors for banks. So company was once an extremely profitable organization. However, due to the shift of technology, people got away from ATMs and really using banks seemed to be a thing of the past. The IA background where we were conducted to do work was a risk assessment of the scope confirmed by management. And we were doing formalized internal audits on kind of it was 10 / as needed basis, but it was really a co-sourcing of the internal audit team and SOX controls. But due to the expertise and kind of the subject matter experts within the manufacturing environment that we have, the company saw a sharp decline in major financial areas. So there needed to be a reduction or a change in some way, shape, or form. The COO approached the IA team just with our knowledge of the company to offer a solution to the decrease in cash flow of the organization. So what we did here was, because the environment was, I wouldn't say toxic, but it was difficult. We had to come up with a solution of implementation here to speed things up, to eliminate kind of the lull in day to day. We actually created bots that automated the entire AP process where they were looking at invoices. So change of the invoices had to take place. So we took a change of the invoices, and those were able to communicate with bots that we implemented within the systems to auto bill, auto receive, payments. So took a huge chunk out of the organization of people, but we were able to find efficiencies back across of using bot technology to find invoices, pay invoices, and so on and so forth. But within that, there's a increased level of risk when you're looking at going to a bot technology of IT risk and operational risk. Ultimately, nobody's as good as somebody that's been there for 20 years rather than a robot that's looking for the right numbers and the right boxes. But within the manufacturing environment, this was able to kind of communicate extremely well. And we were able to drive those efficiencies back across of what we were doing by using the bots. I want to spend a little bit of time here on the scoping. So this is kind of a forward looking. I'm going to kind of tie the last 8 minutes here together with where we started and where we're at now. But audits, internal audit, and especially kind of in the manufacturing world, we're always changing. I think manufacturers change a significant amount, dealing with so many kind of uncontrollable controls. Where we like to kind of control what we can. There's a lot of markets that impact, community impact, so on and so forth. So kind of areas that should be on the radar for testing or preparedness. Environmental impact, ESG, is what you'll hear a lot of the time. So what is your impact on the environment, social and governance? So what's our outlook of pollution look like? What does our footprint in the community look like? And kind of what do we depict it as a company is going to be a big play. I've seen that a lot come up in audit committee meetings as ESG becomes a hotbed conversation item. People and schedules, I think, is always going to be something that needs to be on the radar in the minds of manufacturers. I think, as if minimum wage is increasing, as communications are kind of getting, spread throughout communities, and we might be losing people, is do we have adequate scheduling? Do we have adequate people that we're not going to hit a wall of downtime or hit a wall of people, not being physically on site? Quality control is going to be another kind of audit area. A lot of manufacturers have a quality control department where they're looking at what's going on and what's going out the door. Audits can help those. What does a flag item look like? Why are we flagging items? What does a good product look like? How is that communicated to our lines and to our production team? In the warehouses, so we have a high percentage of quality going out the door. I've said it 3 or 4 times here, but inventory inventory is a huge aspect of what is in a manufacturing environment. It's what we do. It's our product. There's always going to be areas to test in inventory. There's always going to be count procedures. There's going to be asset tagging, fixed asset movements. How are we tracking movements? What does our inventory levels look like at any given time? And do we have adequate inventory levels? And what does our inventory facility look like? I think is a big question. And then finally, invoicing, approvals and utilization of IT. I think the last case study painted a picture, at a very, very high level of what the impact of IT can be, within invoicing. I think APAR in a manufacturing world is done a lot by the same person. And, how can you make that job easier if you're sending out hundreds of invoices, a day, week, or month? What does that look like? It is a great conversation. And ultimately is, if we're happy with our invoicing, are we doing testing around it? Are there appropriate signatures and sign off? Are there, levels for approval, a dollar level for approval that we're, approving appropriate amounts, from a holistic standpoint. So when looking kind of back, that these are going to kind of be forward thinking audits and scopes that I've seen and that I'm going to keep seeing and hearing as we're meeting with audit committees and communities. But to kind of summarize what we talked about today, and I think the biggest thing here, and I want to bring home is value add service and value add efficiency. As leaders of companies, I think especially in manufacturing, the services that we're offering, sometimes you can get stuck in the day-to-day of everything, but doing a check every once in a while is a great value add. It's a great value added service to not only our leadership, but to our people. It helps them understand what leadership's looking for. And it all kind of starts through the processes and the phase that I discussed today, where we're looking at, where's the risk sitting within the organization? Where, what are we looking at scoping for considerations of higher risk areas in the company? And then what does our audits look like? And really, a lot of people ask, what's the point of doing this? And ultimately, it's to create those arms and legs and find those efficiencies of operations and, what we're doing. And a lot of the times it might not seem it, but we paint the picture of this is where the company's at, this is where it needs to be, because this is where the leadership views the organization as a whole. And then going back to test and understand the control environment is going to be the green ticket item to keep consistent production, consistent procedures throughout the whole organization. We'll move to the next slide. So Rick, with your CPE. I think this is probably an easy one.
I don't think anyone ever answers no to this one. Maybe they do. So Tyler, we have a few minutes left here where we can take some questions or talk, but I just wanted to highlight a couple of things. Again, first of all, Tyler, thank you for that. It was a great presentation, and like I said early on, I think it's very timely, and it's probably something that most of our clients don't always give a lot of thought to. A couple of things stood out to me as I was listening. I remember even from back in my younger days when we would go to clients and they would say the auditors are here. It was like we were bad guys. We're not bad guys. And in this case, internal audit, we're really, when we're doing the external audit, we are working for the company. When you're doing the internal audit, you're really working to help better the company. So I think a lot of people hear that term audit and say, oh, we don't want anything to do with that. The other thing that really stands out to me through all this, we talked about public company versus private company, large company, small company. The vast majority of our clients do not have an internal audit team. The overwhelmingly vast majority of our clients. So something like this often gets overlooked. What's nice is now having you and your team and your capabilities, we can offer that service to our clients. As I mentioned, our clients, the accounting department and our clients, and most of our clients, they're laser focused on getting things recorded, getting month-end close, getting things tied out.
Yep.
The internal controls are often something that, I don't want to say overlooked, but maybe they just don't have the time to commit to that, and that's where you come in.
Yeah, Jim, and I think it 100%. And I think it kind of attributes to what we talked about, yesterday. Actually, was we as a firm and as a solution group, we are experts in this field. So utilizing the expertise of people that have been in the shoes of our clients and understand the issues and what they faced or they could be facing. I think to have the conversation is a great start. Including with your background, with my background, with Amy's background. We all kind of sat in that manufacturing world at a point in our life where we were on the other side of the table. And you hit the nail on the head, Jim, exactly. Of this gets overlooked, especially from our clients where they might not even have an internal audit department, which is perfectly fine. Because in some cases, doing a check and balance might be daunting, or you might not want to see the results. So yeah, that's why using us and having the conversation of where to start is always a great place.
Yeah, and it's like I said, it's our clients are often so busy working in their business that they're not working on their business, and this is where we would come in to help strengthen the controls, to help protect. I mean, that's what it really gets down to. Is the stronger the internal controls are, the more protection afforded. Right. So, and we do. Well, one of the things when we started our industry groups, our solutions groups here at HBK, is we wanted to build teams of experts in those industries, and it's always good to have people with that background in the manufacturing industry to be able to come and assist in projects like this. And you mentioned earlier cybersecurity, hacking, and that's something that is a really hot button now that we also can assist with. So I think there's so many opportunities, and there's so many of our clients just based on limitations that they have within their organization that don't get to these things, and that's where we can help.
100%.
So I don't know, Michelle, 100%. If there's any questions out there for us.
There is no questions right now.
No. Okay. Once again, I want to thank Tyler. Certainly, if anybody after this has any questions or wants to talk more about this, feel free to contact Tyler. Feel free to contact me. Feel free to contact Amy. Feel free to contact anyone in HBK that can get you in front of the people that you need to talk to. So, again, I just want to thank everybody for joining us again today. We'll be back again next month, third Wednesday of every month with our webinar, and I'm sure we'll have another interesting topic. So, thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
All righty. Thanks.